We've been around that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. My name is Dan Wajak. I'm Butler County Commissioner. I've been appointed as the TAC chair for this year. So I'm looking forward to this. I was several years ago and I've been involved in WAMPO for a number of years. So with that, we'll move along. Approval of the TAC agenda. I have a motion.
So move to approve the agenda as presented. Second.
Yeah, motion and a second to approve. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Okay. Approval of TAC meeting minutes of January 27th. Motion, I got a second. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right, moving on. Director's report, Chad.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the Technical Advisory Committee. As you all know, our Commissioner Dan Wajak was TAC chair in 2015 and 2016, exactly 10 years after. I'm Commissioner played many roles in TPB and various places, various activities guiding us in the past 10 years as well. So we have a few reports to report to you. When Peter has some of the tip and public comment and ITS architecture. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Peter. Okay, that's all. They're all probably batteries. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Peter. So we have a few reports to report to you, TIP and ITS architecture. ITS architecture is a plan and study that's going on. Staff would like to encourage you to take advantage of this study because it happens once in every 5 years or so. So we want to make sure, because WAMPO is committed to serving jurisdictions very well. And our TPB board also advises us, how can you make sure the agency is serving jurisdictions well? So every time the study comes in, please take advantage and Peter, work with Peter on, what you'd like to see happen. So Peter. Thank you.
First on our list, we have the bi-monthly TIP project statuses. So as you're all well aware, coming to these meetings, the bi-monthly TIP project or TIP policy is to have these bi-monthly progress reports for projects that were programmed to receive WAMPO sub-allocated federal funding in the current federal fiscal year or that received it in the past but have yet to finish. So as is our custom, I'll go through our projects that we have scheduled to let and obligate this year. So we have the 53rd Street Oliver to Woodlawn multi-use path project, anticipated to let in May of 2025. We have the Douglas Seneca to Meridian project, anticipated to let in August of this year. The 17th Street North I-135 to Hillside, anticipated to let in June. The Seneca Street multi-use path, anticipated to let in September of this year. The Southwest Butler Road improvements from Southwest 170th Street to Southwest 155th Street, anticipated to let in September of 2025. The Wichita Intelligent Transportation Systems on East 21st Street North, anticipated to let in early fall of 2025. And then, of course, the Redbud Path from Woodlawn to K96, anticipated to let in September of this year. And this is also available on your packet or in your packet on page 11. You can see the map here, all those projects. And then as always, we'd like to give mention, and this is available in the packet as well, the federal fiscal year 2025 non-sub-allocated federal funds in the TIP after our most recent amendment, amendment number 3. With that, any questions on the bi-monthly updates?
Thank you, Peter. Next item.
And then to bring notice, the federal fiscal year 2025 to 2028 Transportation Improvement Program, amendment number 4, the public comment period opens on February 28th and runs through March 14th.
Next slide.
Thank you. Keep going.
And then on the ITS architecture, we initially had a regional stakeholder meeting and a steering committee planned for actually later this afternoon. Those have been rescheduled for the for the second half of April and the first half of May. We wanted to get more time to do two things. One, get some very polished deliverables that we can look at during the meetings, especially the regional stakeholder meeting, and make sure I can get good feedback for that report. And then also we'd like to go around and talk to the different jurisdictions individually and just see what our needs and gaps are and include that in report, and then hopefully have that ready to go at these steering committees and regional stakeholder meetings so we can make them extremely productive. I don't think we were quite there yet. And so out of the best of all of the options available, I thought, let's go ahead and delay and make sure we're ready. Any questions on the ITS architecture?
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate your leadership on, this project. So any questions for Peter? Okay. All right. So next item we have is Marky presenting on transit, ridership, and regional connections presentations at the TV.
Good morning, I'm Marky Jonas, the community planner here at WAMPO. I just wanted to give an update. As you all know, as part of WAMPO's mission is to keep all of our stakeholders informed. So we just wanted to give you an update of the ridership numbers for the government provided transit services in 2024. So with that, this is in your packet on page 13, and I'll just read through them real quick. So for Wichita Transit, they had 1,130,690 rides. The Derby Dash had 7,868. Hayesville Hustle had 3,331. Sedgwick County Transportation had 5,828. And Butler County Transit had 15,274. And then I will note that for Butler County Transit, that is for all of Butler County, not just the portion that is in the WAMPO region.
Thank you, Marky. That ties well with today's transit study presentation as well. So Marky, you have, the series, regional connection series presentation.
Yes, and so the next thing is we wanted to announce that we are starting a new initiative that we're calling the Regional Connections Presentations, where we're asking all of our jurisdictions and planning partners to make presentations to the transportation policy body, just to give updates on any programs, projects, initiatives, any updates really. And so the goals of this are just to increase the facilitation of information, enhancing the regional understanding, and encouraging collaboration. And these will be scheduled at our regular TPP meetings. A bit more information about this is all of the topics of regional significance are welcomed, and we're going to kind of subdivide them into the categories of growth patterns, planned transportation improvement projects, regional ties between growth patterns and transportation improvements, as well as any other topic of regional significance. So we have a schedule of those that we are working to fill out. I'm sure we will be reaching out to see who's interested in scheduling one of those. And as that fills up, we will present that again. But please feel free to reach out to me as well if you'd like to reserve a time to present.
Thank you, Marky. And we did this like 4 years ago. Yeah. So every 5 years, we want to see what changes have happened, what new employers have come, what new initiatives are taking place, what new roadways and connections are happening in the region. So it's just to catch up on what happened in a few years. So thank you, Marky. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Marky and Peter. Public comment. Is there anybody who'd like to address the committee? Either here or online? All right. Moving on, regional transit implementation plan.
Bill Troy is online, Mr. Chair.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I've got some slides here to share. Okay, I guess they're already there. I will close out of that, but what I just wanted to do is take a few minutes this morning to present kind of the final elements of the regional transit implementation plan that we've been working on for a while. The plan document, there is a link in your packet to the plan document. And it can also be, I guess it'll take you to the WAMPO website where you can find that document. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. I have a couple of them here at the beginning, just to kind of reset the overall process and the themes that we have been developing and working towards an action plan in the document. But essentially, we had these four relatively simply stated questions that we wanted to address as we were going through the study outline. And each of these are incorporated into various presentations that we've made to you before and are all documented essentially within the regional transit plan document. If we could go to the next slide. So the goals of the study are essentially boiled down to identifying enhancements to service that would address the improvements to the commute for those folks that are living outside of Wichita to get to those jobs that are within Wichita. We also had another goal of providing more transit opportunities for those folks that are living in what I'll call as the outlying communities, or those communities within the MPO area that are outside of Wichita, that for the most part, folks in those communities either have service through Sedgwick County Transportation, or there is the Hayesville Hustle, there is Derby Dash, plus the private nonprofit services that are available. And you could see the ridership associated with each of those, as Marky had presented earlier. But essentially, outside of Wichita, there is a relatively limited amount of service being provided today. The next study goal was to evaluate those opportunities to improve the access to employment opportunities outside of Wichita. And if you look at how employment in the region has been changing, is most likely anticipated to continue to change going into the future, is that the suburban or outlying community employment is ticking up as a percentage of the employment growth within the region. But again, there's very limited opportunities for public transit service to get to those employment opportunities. And what we're looking at here provides some improvements to those. And finally, the last goal is to make sure that we're talking about what I'll call as real opportunities, which really means those opportunities that have support for the funding that is going to be needed to provide those services. Okay, next slide. If we could just go to the next one, is I want to talk a little bit here about the service recommendations, which are these, again, just at this level is a little bit more background still, is we essentially developed 3 themes that then support each of those first 3 goals that I had talked about. So we have opportunities for more service that supports the commute from outlying communities to the employment opportunities in Wichita. We also have some concepts or themes that we had looked at for more service among the throughout the region that would enhance demand response or provide some fixed route. And then the final one is we also have service recommendations that support more service for the commute, that is the reverse commute within the region. Next slide then. Okay, the recommendations that we have for service, that we essentially divided the concepts into 2 different groups. The first group was what we're calling is the shorter term. It's essentially the concepts that we had developed and discussed throughout the last summer and into the fall, that also received positive feedback from the community leaders that we had sent surveys to get their input. That throughout the bulk of last year, with kind of culminating into the summer, is that we had identified a series of potential new service ideas that could be extending fixed route service from Wichita to some of the communities. It could be more demand response service. It could be adding van pool service within the region, a series of different alternatives. We had presented those alternatives to our stakeholders group that was made up of representatives from the various jurisdictions around the region, gathered input from them, and then ultimately sent a survey to each of the jurisdictions asking for their feedback as to which of these potential ideas would they see as applicable within their community, and would they support advancing that particular alternative within their community. And then we kind of subdivided that advancing into, hey, is this an alternative that you would see as being advanced with you or your community being the provider? Or is it more of a concept that we see benefit to it, but we don't see ourselves as the operator of that particular service? And that we had received comments back from 9 or 10 of the jurisdictions within the region. And those that we received comments back from that were positive towards implementation, there we had put those opportunities into a shorter term concept. But then we also developed a grouping of what we're calling as aspirational, those elements that people thought were good ideas, but there's going to need to be a reasonable or decent amount to a significant amount of additional coordination within the region, additional analysis of the potential opportunities and things like that, before it could be really advanced to an implementation stage. So there are ideas that we want to keep within the region, but then they are going to need more work to get them done. In that we see that this is a relatively conservative approach, because I think with the idea that each of these alternatives is likely going to cost more money, that communities are going to be responsible for at least a local portion, in addition to whatever federal money, whatever state money, whatever fares can be generated, that lining that funding up is going to take some time and coordination. But we don't want to just, essentially do this study and say, well, okay, here are your ideas that let's figure out, without any real idea as to, okay, these are things that you can do to continue to advance the idea. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, this is a map of areas where we had the shorter term recommendations. So those that are identified here, and we have them established by jurisdiction. So you can see that within Goddard, that the shorter term concept to continue to look at was extending some express bus service from Wichita to Goddard. That this was an alternative that received positive feedback from representatives from Goddard. And so that here what we would see is that then representatives from Goddard, representatives from Wichita Transit would continue to have conversations about how that service can be provided within the region. How are the costs for that service going to be allocated between those potential funding partners that there may be between the state, between FTA funding, between fares, and for all of these extensions of service that outside of Wichita that would include Wichita Transit, we are assuming that the local portion of that cost would be allocated to the communities receiving the new service. That it wouldn't be the assumption that, well, an extension of Wichita Transit service is going to then be funded by Wichita Transit, which puts the local portion of that cost on to Wichita residents and businesses. What we're assuming is that each of the outlying communities that would receive the service would provide that local match. Okay, I'm not going to go through each of these, but I just wanted to use that as an example to also explain what we were assuming, what we had integrated into the overall concept for funding. You can see here that there is a relatively limited number of these short-term or shorter-term action items for implementation. And if we go to the next slide, that we have a considerable amount, a greater amount of aspirational concepts that we are promoting. And that, again, these are concepts that received positive feedback through the stakeholders, positive feedback through the outreach to the various communities, but it was more of a situation from the input from the communities is, yes, we think this is a good idea and we are interested in being a partner, but we can't be or don't see ourselves as the provider. And that those are primarily the ideas that are listed in or circled in yellow. Those that are circled in red, we put into even a further out aspirational phase of looking for opportunities to increase the amount of service provided through Sedgwick County Transportation, to be able to provide communities throughout the county with additional service, to, again, meeting those themes of getting people more opportunities to commute into Wichita, providing opportunities for employment that is growing within a number of those outlying communities so that people have the opportunity to get to those jobs, and then those folks that are living in those communities to make sure that they have those transportation opportunities throughout the course of the day to get to medical appointments, to go, grocery shopping, to just visit other people. But these, again, are those ideas that are going to take more coordination between potential providers and communities to make sure that those services come to fruition. And here we also have incorporated both the idea of more service within Sedgwick County, but then also the additions of service that from Butler County that influence the WAMPO area. Okay, and if you want to just go through this quickly as you see the opportunities here, is that these aspirational opportunities include a combination of additional fixed route scheduled service. It includes more demand response service. It includes those things that are not provided within the region today, such as an organized van pool program that, and then and different and additional, or I guess the reinvigoration of the idea of coordinating with Uber or Lyft to provide collaboration service with them, so that we have quite a broad range of ideas here. Some that could be very well almost self-funding, like with a van pool, with van pool programs which could serve both that concept of employment outside of Wichita, employment within Wichita, that those programs don't require a real substantial investment by the public sector in those situations where you essentially have a longer commute trip, which people then on that commute trip are going to have more cost. And if you can then put together a van pool, you can essentially have the van pool participants funding the vast majority, if not all, of the cost of that particular service. Okay, next slide. We also, understanding that, hey, when we bring together a range of different potential communities or providers or even constituents that are using the service, we also have to think a little bit more about, well, how are we going to go about governing the provision of service within the region? And then that's the last thing that I just wanted to touch on this morning. So if we go to the next slide, is that why are we looking at opportunities for and options for governance? Is that that really, when you're looking at the graphic that we have on this chart, on this slide, is that these are all of the different elements that is required to essentially provide public transportation service within any region. And what we're also then looking at is that, well, since we have a pretty good array of things here, we also need to look at each of those as opportunities for coordination. So even if we had, like today, we have Derby Dash, we have Hayesville Hustle, we have Sedgwick County Transportation, we have Wichita Transit, is that each of these current agencies provide all of these things over the course of them doing business in each day or each week or each month or each year. That each of these is opportunities for them to share some of that responsibility. Because and that, but with that, we need to also think about, well, how organized, how regimented, how do we need to really get in kind of developing a consistent understanding of responsibilities. So if we go to the next, and that's what governance is really going to be looking at, is that as through the course of this work, that we essentially looked at an entire range of operating scenarios from, well, we could have a situation where any new service within the region comes in with independent operators, essentially consistent with what we have today. We could also start to share some of that service very informally through just an understanding of, well, that we are going to partner in this from the operator of this community, a little bit with the partner and an operator of another community, and share some of those responsibilities that I showed in the previous slide. But then we can also kind of work our way down the spectrum here of also putting together more formalized agreements through interlocal agreements, through joint powers agreements. And the whole thing that as we're having these conversations on governance, that kind of the two things that we need to be making sure that we're balancing or that ultimately get balanced are the amount of local control that each of the operators or each of the jurisdictions really wants to have in providing service to their constituents, and the cost effectiveness. Because if you think that there's a series of 10 independent providers providing all of those items that I showed in the previous slide, well, there's a lot of duplication in costs associated with some of those things that could be shared. But as we continue to think about those things that need to be shared, we also need to think about how formal the agreements need to be. And then we also incorporated into this kind of looking all the way to the right side of the spectrum here of having one agency be the provider, or that agency may be it could be an authority made up of various jurisdictions coming together. It could be one agency that essentially sells service to other jurisdictions within the region. If we go to the next slide. So as we were looking at the overview, that these are essentially the concepts that we had developed a little bit more maybe detail on, with a focus on the idea of a regional authority, because I think that has been a concept that over the course of time comes up and gets discussed and then kind of goes away a little bit and then comes back up. So that what we wanted to do in this study was make sure that we laid out some of the details of the authority concept and some of those steps that would need to be addressed, that if the concept was to continue to, or was to move forward within the region. If we go to the next slide. And that just the purpose here is that, okay, there's going to be, as you continue to talk about regional transportation service, that there's going to be different scenarios of how you want to go about providing it, that they will come up. So the intent of this slide is to kind of just give you a little bit of an understanding, at least from our perspective, as to which of these different types of governance options would be most applicable in each of these different situations, that from one agency selling service to another agency or a group of agencies, two communities, or coming together to jointly operate a service, all the way to, well, cheapers, if we've got 20 some odd jurisdictions within the WAMPO area, well, what if they all came together to provide a public transportation service within the region? Could you do that with a series of joint powers agreements? Could you do that with interlocal agreements? Or would you be better off thinking on more from that regional perspective, is we'd have one agency or one organization that would manage transit service within the entire region? So this is the purpose of this is just to kind of give you a snapshot of how each of these may work better than others, for each of the kind of the scenarios that we had developed here. And I think as time goes on, additional scenarios can be developed. Okay, next slide. I think that might be it. Okay, that was pretty quick. Covered kind of everything from soup to nuts, but are there questions that people have?
Nope, that's
Good question.
pardon me.
May I have a
Sure.
question? Thank you.
Chad has one.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, appreciate it. Bill, thanks for, explaining the, governance options. On page 12 of the report, Bill, there is a types of FTA funding recipients that has
Yeah.
like designated recipient, direct recipient, and sub-recipient. For the benefit of this audience, could you please elaborate how those recipients are different with respect to the governance, Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so, okay, so a lot of times what we get into is in particular, well, only in metropolitan areas where there may be the desire to have multiple providers, is that we also then of public transportation service, that and if there are multiple providers that want to access federal dollars, we need to go through and put together a program of how those dollars, or who gets to control essentially the distribution of those dollars. That within every metropolitan area in the country that has public transportation service, there is a designated recipient of federal dollars. There can only be one designated recipient in any metropolitan area. So you may be a metropolitan area that's just over the line of 50,000, that you have one designated recipient. You go to New York, and the New York metropolitan area has one designated recipient of federal dollars. Now, there's so that and that arrangement is developed through the governor of the state and whoever, and that who may be potential designated recipients. That again, in the smaller metropolitan areas, we have a relatively small transit agency. A lot of times in those situations that a city or the primary jurisdiction is identified as the designated recipient. In Wichita, the designated recipient is Wichita Transit. So now let's say that we have additional providers come into the region that want access to that same pool of federal dollars that Wichita Transit has. That the options there are, each of those providers works with Wichita Transit, and that between them, they maybe a little bit more informally go through and divide up the pot of federal dollars that there are. But then there are also situations where if I'm a suburban provider, maybe I really don't like that distribution that I've been able to work out with Wichita Transit, or I don't like the idea of needing to go through Wichita Transit, the designated recipient, to get my federal dollars each month, each quarter, or however the distribution occurs. I can petition to be a direct recipient of those funds. So then that really means then that operating funds that come into the region, or those funds that come into the region by formula, that when there's a designated recipient, all of those dollars go through that one designated recipient and then to the sub-recipients. That if you're a direct recipient, that those dollars go directly to you. Now, okay, that sounds like, nope, now I'm working directly as a suburban agency with FTA, but in reality, there still needs to be a conversation each year or on some basis with the designated recipient, because the designated recipient still controls that those dollars that come in. It's just that when you have also direct recipients, there's a little bit more of a responsibility of everybody to work out a more equitable split. And that when you're looking at kind of just how that works, that most regions even call that arrangement the splits memo that we put together. How much of the federal dollar do we as a non-designated recipient receive? And it gets to be a little bit complex, but and actually, I mean, the more as I go along here, I find this a very interesting portion of how transit is supported and implemented within a region.
Thank you. Thank you for your expertise.
Sorry, it gets a little dicey there sometimes.
Any other questions? Sure.
So, with this plan, are we doing, and what's the next steps after we approve it? Are we implementing anything or?
Thank you, thank you, Brent, for the question. What do we do next with the plan is the question. This is a good plan that shows the options. Once the jurisdictions determine how they take advantage of these directions, this will still be a valid and useful point in the space for the next step. Because the next step would be like, how can we come together in those agreements and those partnerships is up to us. Bill can only develop the guidelines and frameworks, and this plan does a good job in developing those examples and frameworks, both in terms of how can jurisdictions partner, as well as how can major employers partner with governments, such as the Uber, Lyft, and other providers, and how their partnership, like a private-public partnership, those guidelines are in this. At this time, these are all, a point where if we are taking next steps, this would be a good basis to take that next step. But again, it is up to jurisdictions how they would like to shape up their transit with all these provided. In other words, there is no direct next step to this because of Bill and the staff tried a lot. What do we do during this time of plan development? And we didn't hear a lot from everyone in terms of collaboration or agreements and so on. So this will still remain as a valuable document. If you want to move forward in the next step, this will be a starting point to take that next step. Or if you do, even if you do the next plan again, this would again form a basis of what all we gathered, what all the data we gathered, what all the options we gathered, so that type of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, thanks again, Bill. We appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Moving on, the Metropolitan Transit Plan 2050.
Actually, I think so. Sorry.
Oh, you need
Sorry.
action on that one?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. And Peter, could you please help us with the action options?
Brings us to our action items. So for
Yeah, that's my
sorry
mistake.
about the delay there. The Regional Transit Implementation Plan action options. So we can recommend the TPP approve the Regional Transit Implementation Plan as presented, not approve, or approve with specific changes. Staff recommendation is to recommend the TPP approve the Regional Transit Implementation Plan as presented.
Okay, any questions? Motion,
I'll make a motion to approve the regional transit implementation plan as presented.
second, okay. We have a motion and a second to approve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. All right, thank you. Now we'll go on to the Metropolitan Transit Plan. Nick?
Thank you, Chair. As mentioned previously at our last meeting, which not everyone here would have been at, all chapters and appendices of Metropolitan Transportation Plan 2050 have drafts of them online at wampo.org/MTP 2050 that you can review anytime. And we have been getting those reviewed by the by the Plan Advisory Committee and our KDOT and FHWA and FTA planning partners. And it includes the project list that was approved by the TPB back in November. At their most recent meeting on February 11th, the TPB voted to release draft MTP 2050 for public comment. And so we will have a 30-day public comment period, March 8th through April 7th this year, which will be public engagement round 4. And I will incorporate the comments and responses to the comments of the reviews that we have had so far. And then after the public comment period, any comments received during that public comment period, we will address and then bring it to this body on April 28th for a recommendation. And then on May 13th to the TPB for a formal vote on approval, just 1 month before the deadline for getting a new MTP approved. And after that, the only thing left will be one last round of public engagement to introduce the approved plan to the general public. Now, let's quickly show you some screenshots of where the draft chapters and appendices appear on wampo.org/MTP 2050. One tab for the 7 chapters and one tab for the 14 appendices. So I will note that we do have plans soon to rework the order of some of these appendices. So just to keep that in mind as we go ahead with this presentation. And now we are going to go through the 7 chapters of MTP 2050, and then the first half of the appendices. The other half of the appendices we plan to present at a later meeting because it's just so much. The 7 chapters are plan, purpose, and development, regional trends, existing conditions, system management, system performance report, financial plan, and project selection and list. The first chapter, plan, purpose, and development, introduces the regulatory environment for metropolitan planning organizations and the requirement to have a metropolitan transportation plan approved at least once every 5 years with a planning horizon of 20 years or more. It provides introduction to the WAMPO region and to the WAMPO organization. It summarizes the planning process that we followed of establishing a vision and goals for the MTP, then identifying needs and baseline conditions through data analysis and public engagement, and finally developing a fiscally constrained project list, which the TPB approved back in November. It lists related planning documents and WAMPO committees, and it gives a brief summary of the public engagement activities for MTP 2050, but there is a much longer discussion of those in the public engagement appendix, which will be presented on later. And finally, it introduces the vision, goals, and objectives of the MTP and how they align with the U.S. Department of Transportation's federal planning factors. The vision of MTP 2050 is to enhance connectivity in a way that supports the equitable development of a safe, reliable, multimodal transportation network that enriches the quality of place within the WAMPO region. And the goals in support of that vision are to make things safe and reliable, equitable and accessible, connected and multimodal, and to have environmental and financial stewardship. Chapter 2, and discuss chapter 2, and I'll turn things over to Dora Gallo.
Thank you, Nick. So chapter 2 explains regional economic sectors, a residential expansion, transportation networks, impacts on the environment, and equity. 2.1 and 2.2 in the regional connections and demographics. So 2.1 summarizes broad growth trends in employment and population throughout the region. You can see an example of a population pyramid for the region, which is included in the plan. 2.2 explores the region's current and past demographics. 2.3 and 2.4 are education and housing. 2.3 examines the distribution of schools and the scale of the regional education system. And 2.4 goes into the region's past and present household characteristics. And you can see here an example of the median household value by the census tracts. 2.5 and 2.6 are employment and jobs and travel. So 2.5 summarizes current and projected regional employment and highlights trends across various industry sectors. 2.6 analyzes regional commuting patterns and transit usage. Here's a map of the Wichita Transit demand response, trips, origin to and destination. 2.7 and 2.8 are environmental resources and environmental justice. So 2.7 examines the transportation's environmental impact, and 2.8 identifies and assesses impacts on minority and low income populations. Here to the right is an example of regional minority and low income populations. Chapter 3 is looking into existing conditions, describes the existing transportation infrastructure and services in the WAMPO region. 3.1 and 3.2 are roadways and bridges and transit and paratransit. So 3.1 describes the current network of bridges and roads and usage intensity of the national highway system. You can see here a map of the annual average daily traffic on the nation highway system. 3.2 summarizes the existing conditions of regional transit and paratransit services. 3.3 is bicycle and pedestrian. So it's just looking at the current state of regional bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure and identifies potential avenues for future improvement. Here is an example of a map that's in the plan, looking into the bicycle and pedestrian count projections that we do every year. 3.4 is freight, so it's examining existing freight routes and the movement of goods across various transportation modes, including highways, railways, and air transport. Here's an example of one of the maps that shows a primary highway freight network. And 3.5 is electric vehicles, provides an overview of current electric vehicle infrastructure, potential routes for future deployments, and opportunities for funding. And here's another map of the chargers in the WAMPO region. I'll hand it over to Peter Moore. Thank you.
Sorry. sorry that there's only a couple of
Thank you,
copies
Nora.
on the table there. If you would like to see those, they were printed on the table that you mentioned the table.
Thank you, Chad. The chapters were quite extensive. They're about 200 pages. So some of the graphics that we have are maybe a bit difficult to fish out of that document. But we just want to give examples of everything that's in there. So chapter 4, looking at system management, describes how the transportation network is maintained and managed following our existing conditions chapter. So first, it takes a brief overview of infrastructure condition. For an example, bridge condition, we have about 11.3 million square feet of bridge area that needs maintained, and then talks about some of the funding sources that can be provided for by. So for example, STBG, Surface Transportation Block Grant, Kansas Local Bridge Improvement Program, FTA 5307, Urbanized Area Formula Grants, among several others. Next, 4.3 looks at the intelligent transportation systems and just kind of the summary of the regional ITS architecture, its role in the region. There's a specific appendix that we added to the MTP that describes this in more detail. And then it also looks at safety. So overview of the safe system approach and the summary of regional safety action plan of the CSAP, and some relevant statistics identified and our safety emphasis areas. So we looked at intersection speed and vulnerable road users. Also, we'll talk about this later on at our next meeting. You can see Appendix H for the full CSAP plan. And then finally, 4.5 and 4.6, transportation demand management and congestion management. So 4.5 looks at an overview of a set of general strategies designed to optimize transportation efficiency, improve travel options, and promote sustainable mobility without expanding roadway capacity. And then it also showcases some of the forecasts from our newly developed or newly updated travel demand model. Also, we go into more detail in Appendix I on that. 4.6, congestion management process, looks at our congestion management and really refers again to another appendix we developed as part of a federal requirement, the congestion management process document, which forms Appendix J of the MTP. And then finally, system resilience. It looks how we can improve the transportation system resilience to natural disasters and climate change, and looks at the MPO's role in assessing infrastructure vulnerability and coordinating with local planning agencies. And then chapter 5, system performance, just has 2 sections. So first, we look at the federal performance measures, and it examines the required performance measures for the WAMPO region, including a set of safety measures, generally known collectively as PM1, pavement and bridge condition performance measures, known as PM2, PM3, system performance, kind of looks like congestion metrics, and then also transit asset management, or TAM. You can see on the side of the slide there, we have the PM1 safety ones for the WAMPO region. A complete table is available in the document that looks farther back and then shows the state metrics alongside these. And then 5.2, the regional performance measures, explores several regional performance measures beyond those federally required. So in the document, we looked at commuter mode share, which is here on the screen. We have the average travel time to work by 2023 ACS, or American Community Survey data, greenhouse gas emissions, and also our sidewalk multi-use path network length, and our survey that we completed in 2022. And then with that, I will hand this over to Nick to talk about Chapter 6, our financial plan.
Thank you, Peter. And I should have mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, to those of you in the room, each of you should have a draft copy of the executive summary of MTP 2050 that you can reference during this presentation. And at the ends of the tables, we have 2 copies of the draft full plan and all of the appendices, with one especially long appendix pulled out in its own binder. The purpose of the financial plan chapter is simple. It is to demonstrate how the MTP is fiscally constrained. That refers to the federal requirement that, according to the MTP, the estimated project costs of the projects listed in the MTP plus the estimated cost to operate and maintain the transportation system are less than or equal to projected revenues. Now, we calculated this not just for all transportation writ large, but also for the individual categories of KDOT projects, public transit, and local government aside from public transit, since those three categories are responsible for distinct facilities, have different funding sources and different approval processes. Therefore, it just made sense to keep them separate for now, but then also calculate things for the three of them summed together, of course. We also calculated for the three time bands of 2025 to 2028, 2029 to 2038, and 2039 to 2050. Our baseline assumption, unless otherwise noted, was that revenues would increase at 1% per year conservatively, and that costs for O&M would increase at 4.5% per year inflation rate, which is what is the default assumption used by KDOT. There is no distinction between WAMPO sub-allocated federal funding and WAMPO non-sub-allocated federal funding on the local project section. I'm just going to quickly show you that there were 144 projects divided amongst those different time bands and different project types, and the three different categories of project sponsor. I'm just going to very quickly skim through the table that you actually should see near the end of that copy of the executive summary there of the final fiscal constraint table, showing that revenues minus O&M costs leaves more than the amount that is estimated to be the cost of the projects in the plan. Now, Chapter 7 is all about that project list that the TPB approved in November. And it goes into the selection process. September 15th, 2023 through February 2nd, 2024, we held a combined call for projects for MTP 2050 and for the federal fiscal year 2025 to 2028 Transportation Improvement Program. WAMPO staff and consultants scored the projects received during this call for projects using criteria that were adopted by the TPB and reflected the projects in the travel demand model for the region. The Project Selection Committee made recommendations on projects for the 2025 to 2028 TIP, which were adopted into the new 25 to 2028 TIP on August 13th, 2024. Then on October 3rd, 2024, the PSC convened again to recommend projects for the rest of the MTP 2050 planning horizon and the fiscally constrained project list for that. On October 28th, the TAC concurred with their recommendations, and on November 12th, the TPB approved the project list. As mentioned in the discussion of Chapter 6, there are three time bands for the project list of 25 to 28 to match the period of the TIP, and most of the projects in that time band are those that also appear in the new TIP. Then 29 to 38, the next 10 years after that, and 39 to 50, just the remainder of the planning horizon. And again, they're separated out into three types of sponsoring agency: KDOT, public transit, and local governments except for public transit. there is an option with these kinds of lists to have an illustrative list of projects outside the fiscally constrained list that could potentially be moved up to the fiscally constrained list and made eligible for funding in the future. However, as it happened, the fiscal constraint analysis showed enough funding for all of the projects that were submitted during the call for projects to get onto the fiscally constrained list, and therefore there was no need for an illustrative list. Also included in the fiscally constrained project list are category projects, what we used to call bucket projects, for categories of projects that usually have a shorter lead time before they are started. And so it is more difficult to get them into one of these long-range planning documents that looks 20 years into the future and it's only updated once every 5 years. That way, projects that fit into these categories are able to get into the TIP just by being in those categories and not necessarily by being listed specifically in the MTP. These include public transit projects, bicycle and pedestrian improvements, traffic flow and safety improvements, intelligent transportation system projects, and regional studies. Projects may also qualify to get into the TIP based on being consistent with the vision and goals of the MTP. Now, just to quickly show you the locations of some of the mappable projects in the MTP, here they are by time band and by project type: bridge replacement or rehabilitation, multi-use trails and bicycle facilities, new roadways, pedestrian facilities, roadway expansions, that is adding more through lanes, roadway reconstruction / modernization, i.e. roadway improvements that do not include increasing the number of through lanes, and traffic management technology. And I'll just go quickly through the project lists of the 7 KDOT sponsored ones, mostly in the first time band, the category projects for public transit that we put in, and a lot of local government projects in all 3 time bands, though unsurprisingly, not as many in the last time band. And now we are going to get into 7 of the 14 appendices, that is the 7 that are bolded here. Now, we are not going to present them in the order that they are presented here, so we are going to make sure to call out the letters of the appendices to help you avoid getting confused as we go through them. And we are putting them out of order in order to not have to switch presenters at every single slide is the reason, and also a bit of, I hope, thematic consistency as we go through them. So here we go. Appendix A, Plan Development. This appendix is a short one, and it just goes over the processes and methodologies that were used to create the plan, documents our data collection efforts. It briefly introduces public engagement, but that is discussed much more in Appendix B, which will actually be the last one you hear about. It outlines how the goals and priorities for MTP were established for the sake of transparency and compliance with regulations. And it is an overall guide to our planning process. Appendix C introduces the project scoring model. As I mentioned, we had our call for projects for the MTP from September 15th, 2023 to February 2nd, 2024. The projects that were submitted during this period had to be reviewed by the Project Selection Committee, but to help the Project Selection Committee, they had the option of referring to scores that were calculated for each project on the basis of criteria that were adopted by the Transportation Policy Body back on October 12th, 2021. WAMPO staff and consultants came up with a model for automating that process of project scoring so that we could get a consistent scoring methodology for all the projects so that they would have one consistent measure that could be presented to the project selection committee, which again was not the only thing that the project selection committee considered in their recommendations. Far from it. And these scores were by project type, since reasonably different kinds of projects have different kinds of considerations. And so not all of the same inputs went into the scorecards for every project type, although there were a lot of commonalities. The scoring was done on the project categories approved by the TPB of bridge rehabilitation and replacement, traffic management technologies, roadway reconstruction and modernization, roadway expansion, new roadways, multi-use trails and bicycle facilities, pedestrian facilities, that is like sidewalks and pedestrian signals and not multi-use trails that are also used by bicycles, safe routes to school, that is bicycle and pedestrian projects that are specifically in the areas around schools and are part of the implementation of safe routes to school plans, such as the ones that we are working on getting instituted throughout the region right this moment, but that's another story. And finally, public transit. And now I will turn things over to Dora Gaio to discuss regional transit implementation appendix.
Thank you, Nick. Appendix E, regional transit implementation, is just an overview of the regional transit implementation plan that Bill just went over. So in 2023, WAMPO hired SRFs to develop a regional transit implementation plan, just ways to improve and expand our public transit for the region. It goes over our short and long-term goals, including connectivity, service frequency, and accessibility. Focuses on addressing current transit needs, planning for future growth, and coordinating with local and regional agencies. It's a roadmap for implementing key improvements, prioritizing investments, and ensuring the transit system is efficient, sustainable, and responsive to community needs. We'll update this page once if TBB approves the Regional Transit Implementation Plan on March 11, 2025. Appendix F is the active transportation analysis. So WAMPO has started to look into doing our request for proposal. So sorry. So we've been working on that so we can start planning for our strategic guide for promoting and enhancing walking, biking, and other non-motorized transportation options in the region. It will aim to improve safety, accessibility, and connectivity for pedestrians, cyclists, and users of other active modes of transportation. The plan will identify infrastructure needs such as bike lanes, sidewalks, and trails, and set forth policies to encourage active transportation as a healthy, sustainable alternative to driving. The plan will also promote equity by ensuring all communities can access safe and convenient active transportation options. Now I'll pass it over to Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Dora. And then Appendix D, the economic development analysis. So that goes into what we did back in 2022. We hired Wichita State University's Center for Economic Development and Business Research, CEDBR, to assist in a comprehensive economic analysis of the region. And as you'll see later today, I'll talk about healthcare. We looked at the 7 major economic sectors ID'd by the Greater Wichita Partnership that you can see there. Advanced manufacturing, aerospace, agriculture, energy, healthcare, IT systems and support, and transportation and logistics. The socio and economic demographic reports were, well, we included those in the appendix, but we have one for each of the 22 municipalities and one report describing the region as a whole. And then our ITS architecture plan that I referenced earlier, the Regional Intelligent Transportation System ITS architecture. It's a structured framework that coordinates the planning and deployment of intelligent transportation systems or technologies across the region. The idea is to ensure efficient, safe, and compatible use of ITS infrastructure devices and data sharing practices among ITS operators. And we began the process of updating this regional ITS architecture in 2024, and that will be the first full update in 2006. On a routine basis, this is intended to be done every 5 years. So we're getting that done now. We're partway through that project. We included a more user-friendly appendix that talks about this in more detail, but doesn't include the entire ITS architecture, as they're quite technical and often, for example, Mark's, the MPO in Kansas City, was about 1,100 pages. So we try to make a more concise, user-friendly document that explains what the ITS architecture is and some of its federal requirements and its structure. And then Appendix B, the public involvement and engagement summary. Pass it over to Marky.
Thank you. Yes. So for Appendix B, that just shows all of the stakeholder and public engagement that we have done so far, and that will be updated after the next round as well. Just to reiterate that this plan is meant to be a collective vision for the region, and so we do want it to be based on the input we have received. So there are, in total, there's 5 rounds of public engagement. The first 3 rounds were for building an understanding of public desires, needs, and priorities. That's when we did a lot of tabling, we had surveys, we spoke to any and everyone that we could. And then round 4, which, as Nick mentioned, is our upcoming round of public engagement, that will collect feedback on the draft plan, and that will also be our 30-day public comment period. And then we have an additional 5th round, which will happen after the plan is approved, and that will just be our ongoing time to introduce the plan to the public, continue implementing it, and making sure that it stays relevant, I suppose, for the next 5 years. And then just to get into our upcoming round of public engagement a bit more, we are still addressing the comments that we received from the Plan Advisory Committee and our state and federal partners. And once those are done, we will officially open the public comment period for the draft plan, which the TPB approved releasing at their previous meeting on February 11th. So the public comment period is going to be from March 8th through April 7th. During that time, we will be doing as much as we can to get the word out and to collect feedback and comments on that. We will also be having a virtual public meeting on March 12th from noon to 1, where we will present the plan, have a question and answer session, and again, just get as much engagement as we can, as well as a larger open house on March 26th from 4 to 6 p.m. And that will be held at the Regional Chamber of Commerce. Please attend. And then we're also seeking other engagement opportunities. So please reach out if you have a meeting you know of that WAMPO could come present at, or even just mention the public comment period at. We'll also be reaching out, requesting any help in distributing notice of the public comment period and helping get the word out to everyone's networks. Does anyone have any questions? Okay.
Thank you. Any
Thank you.
questions for anybody? There's a ton of information there.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. There's no questions. The comprehensive safety action plan update. Kim.
Good morning, Kim Negrete. I am here just to let you know, and I think many of you have probably already heard, it's been about a year since the CSAP was approved, and so we have been implementing it with all of your help, and want to take a moment to reflect on the strategies to ensure they are going to help us reach the outcome of reducing fatalities and serious injuries. So we are planning to have a meeting with the Technical Safety Transportation Advisory Group. And so we'll be doing that tomorrow, actually, to review the strategies and look for any updates or recommendations that we can then provide to you at a future meeting. So any questions on CSAP? thank you all for your continued prioritization of safety. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, employment sectors, healthcare, Peter.
Going to go through one of those regional economic sector reports that we've been doing. I will try to be brief and concise, but very informative. So the employment sectors, we've gone through, I think this will be our 5th out of the 7. We're looking at healthcare. So in general, what I'd like to address is who are the key players today? Where's the industry as a whole right now? And what key factors will affect the future of the industry? So looking at this, there's over 5,000 healthcare establishments throughout the region, and that includes individual doctor's office and other private practices. It is the largest of the 7 sectors defined by the GWP, or the Greater Wichita Partnership, regionally employing 30,861 people in 2021. These private practices are concentrated in the metropolitan center, and they offer a variety of specialty services that are unavailable in rural areas. So nephrology, cardiology, which that does have some availability out in rural areas, but if you need interventions and things, you're going to probably end up in either Wichita, Kansas City, or Oklahoma City, just as the nature of this kind of industry, where you need to consolidate a lot of these specialty services in a regionally condensed area where you just have all of those skill sets. Though the metro plays an important role in providing these specialized services to the regions and other parts or across Kansas, in particular Western Kansas. The largest healthcare employers are Ascension Via Christi and Wesley Healthcare. They both operate our level 1 trauma centers in the WAMPO region, and they serve a huge sections of Western Kansas and even extreme parts of Colorado, depending on availability of beds and other logistical issues. So there are so many other key regional healthcare players: Rock Regional, Kansas Medical Center, Kansas Heart, Kansas Surgery and Recovery, Kansas Spine Specialty, ComCare, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and many, many more. I just don't want to miss your favorite one, because there's so much in healthcare, and I know a lot of people have worked with many, very different healthcare providers, and because they're in healthcare, they're all important. The Wichita, Kansas metropolitan statistical area, you can see our employment number again, that 30,861, kind of a mid-level player amongst these other different MSAs. And you can take a look at these in the economic report that is available online. Our healthcare employment trends has been just about the same, a slight uptick in 2019, but has remained relatively steady and even keel for from 2015 to 2021. The wage comparison, again, kind of middle of the pack, about 51,729. And this includes everybody involved in there. So you have your certified nurse assistants, your RNs, and your physicians, and that's your median healthcare range there. Looking at the inflation adjusted wages, inflation adjusted to 2015, since 2015 to 2021, it modestly beat out inflation. So a modest increase in actual wages since that time. And then key factors for the future. So threat of new entrants, high capital requirements, and lots of government regulations. So it's hard to get new players in sometimes. The threat of substitutes in the health industry is low, as there are no substitutes for locally provided healthcare services. It is by nature an in-person service. You really do require that, so you can't import a hospital. It's always locally provided. You usually, yeah. The rivalry among existing firms, the healthcare industry is highly competitive. Firms must continually compete with rivals to either gain or retain their share of the market. You're usually always taking your customers or patients from somebody else, because everyone is using healthcare or typically has some sort of healthcare provider. So key factors for the future. Any questions on healthcare? I went through that pretty quick.
Go ahead.
Cool. And that brings us to just an update. We have developed our commuter flows report. It's based on 2021 data released by the Longitudinal Employment Household Dynamics. It's a branch of the census. Our report, it covers all 22 cities within the WAMPO region. It has information about each city that includes inflow and outflow, total counts, and historical trends charts, percent of population in the labor force, mean travel time to work, and a workplace and residence heat map. We use the On the Map tool that is developed and maintained by LEHD, or the Longitudinal Employment Household Dynamics arm of the census. It's different from the censusdata.gov that most people are familiar with when you go to look at American Community Survey data. It's a different part that's based on W-2 and Social Security data versus survey data that you normally get from ACS. So commuter flows, with that kind of background where you have W-2 and Social Security information, you can extrapolate workers' residence and where they work, and then you can develop a commuting flow about where people live versus where their work location is per that information. So with that, and you aggregate all the data together, you can develop these inflows and internal flows and outflows. So on a daily basis, you have about 80,000 or so people that have their workplace in Wichita. There's people that work and live in Wichita, about 115,000, and the outflow is about 50,000 or so. It's been modestly stable over time. It's actually had a slight decline in recent years, and we'll look at that on the next slide. The big takeaway with Wichita is it's the only city out of the 22 that has the internal flow as the highest. By internal flow, I mean the most amount of people that both live and work in the same location. If you're looking at different metropolitan areas, if you had to define a hub, I think this would probably be a pretty good metric to look at. Who has the internal flow that is the highest out of all three between inflow, internal, and outflow? And you can see the trends there. Sorry, it's a bit tiny. Again, relatively stable. The outflow has gone down a little bit. The inflow has been just slightly higher at 80,000 versus 80,500 or so, up from 79,500 from from 2020 to 2021. And through here, Derby, and then you can see this kind of recurring pattern. I looked at Derby and Hayesville as kind of the next two larger suburbs. You can see there's an inflow of about 5,300 people. There's about 1,500 or almost 1,600 people that work and live in Derby, and an outflow of about 9,600. And then you can see those same trends. We can see that dip in employed in Derby, but living outside in 2020, and then kind of rebounding back up in 2021. Relatively stable for those living in Derby, but employed outside. And then finally, looking at Hayesville, very similar pattern, inflow of about 1,900, internal about 500. And just when I say similar, just the relative proportions of people inflowing, internal, and outflow for the municipalities that aren't Wichita. And you kind of see here, relatively stable in both, with a slight decline in employed in Hayesville, but living outside. Okay, went through that pretty quick there. Any questions on commuter flows?
Go ahead. Chad has a comment here.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate it. And for benefit of the members, could you please help elaborate on census data versus LEHD, and then what year sources we are using? That way everybody is benefiting.
Absolutely. So most people, when they think of census data, they think of searching online. And if you do a quick your city plus census, you'll end up at data.gov, and that'll take you to American Community Survey data. That is released annually in December, and it typically trails 2 years behind of it. So I guess it's better to say what we have released. Right now in 2025, they released 2023 data. So we have 2023 ACS data. LEHD is a different census product. It's based on W-2 and Social Security information. Oh, data.census.gov. Thank you, Nick. It's based on submittals by the state of W-2 and Social Security information. It takes about 2 years between a state submittal and LEHD's processes where they actually inject some noise in the data, so you can't personally identify anybody from this. Their process takes about 2 years, and their cycle's a bit more irregular. Looking back, right now they have updated their data source, so they're 2022, and we're working on developing a new format for this report. something that shows a bit more of like where people are working in a city versus just the total amount, because it is granular to that level. But there is two different data sources. The one that I think most people are familiar with, this isn't that one. This is LEHD, and they typically release in the fall and they release annually. Ideally, they're only trailing by 2 years. After the 2020 decennial census, they actually skipped a year. And that is largely due to the census block redistricting that they accomplish every 10 years. So if you've seen a map of the census blocks where they have, there's about 12,000 of them in WAMPO, they look at the population, road maps, and based on their formula, come up with new ways to redraw those because things change. People move in, people move out. Once that job gets done, then LEHD can get to work on their part. So they released 2020 data in 2023, and they're slowly catching up on that cycle. That was a long explanation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. Anything else? Any other questions for him? All right, thank you. Other business, Kim, or are you gonna do the KDOT Transportation Safety Conference?
Yes, just wanted to make sure you get a personal invite. We are so excited that KDOT Transportation Safety Conference is going to be hosted here in Wichita, just right around the corner at the Hyatt, March 4th and 5th. There is a law enforcement only day, March 3rd, that will also be occurring. This is a great conference. It is the 30th annual conference. So there are some great national speakers being brought in, great breakouts and data and content that will be shared. So if you get a chance, the registration fee is very low, less than what you would pay to eat at the Hyatt. So hopefully you can have some staff attend and be part of this conference and learning opportunity.
Thank you. Is there any other business anybody needs to bring up? If not, we are so adjourned. Mhm.